The fragile peace in Gaza shattered on March 18, 2025. Israel unleashed a wave of airstrikes targeting various locations within the densely populated Palestinian territory. This marked a devastating end to the 2-month ceasefire that had brought a temporary halt to the ongoing conflict with Hamas. The strikes, as reported by the Palestinian Ministry of Health, resulted in a heavy toll, with at least 404 Palestinians killed and 562 wounded. The sudden eruption of violence plunged the region back into chaos and despair. The intensity of the attacks caught many off guard. The relative calm of the ceasefire period had raised hopes for a more lasting peace. However, the events of March 18 served as a stark reminder of the deep-seated tensions and the ever-present potential for violence in this long-standing conflict. The international community watched with growing concern as the situation unfolded. The renewed hostilities had immediate and far-reaching consequences. The already dire humanitarian situation in Gaza worsened, with hospitals overwhelmed by casualties and essential supplies running low. The civilian population trapped in the crossfire bore the brunt of the violence. The international community faced urgent calls to intervene and broker a new ceasefire. The breakdown of the ceasefire and the resumption of hostilities underscored the fragility of any peace efforts in the region. It also highlighted the complex political and ideological divides that have fueled the conflict for decades. As the world grappled with the latest chapter in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the question remained: how to break the cycle of violence and achieve a lasting peace. Israel defended its actions, claiming the strikes were a necessary response to Hamas's provocations. They pointed to Hamas's refusal to release hostages captured during the October 7, 2023 attacks as a primary justification for their military operation. Furthermore, Israel argued that Hamas had repeatedly rejected ceasefire proposals put forward by U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff and other international mediators. According to Israeli officials, the objective of the operation was to pressure Hamas into compliance with their demands, primarily the release of hostages. They emphasized that the operation was open-ended and could escalate further if necessary to achieve their goals. The international community, while acknowledging the need for the hostages' release, expressed concern over the proportionality of the Israeli response. Hamas, in turn, condemned Israel's actions, labeling them as a unilateral cancellation of the ceasefire. They accused Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of jeopardizing the lives of the hostages by launching the strikes. Hamas maintained that they were open to negotiations for the hostages' release, but refused to do so under duress. The group, designated as a terrorist organization by Israel, the United States and several other countries, vowed to retaliate against the Israeli attacks. They called upon Palestinians to resist the Israeli occupation and defend their land. The escalating rhetoric from both sides raised fears of a wider conflict engulfing the region. The United States, a long-standing ally of Israel, stood firmly by its side. The White House confirmed that Israel had consulted with them prior to launching the strikes and placed the blame for the renewed hostilities solely on Hamas. The U.S. government expressed unwavering support for Israel's right to defend itself and rejected any claims of indiscriminate attacks by the Israeli Defense Forces. U.S. officials reiterated their stance that Hamas, as a terrorist organization, posed a significant threat to regional stability. They emphasized the need for Hamas to release the hostages, renounce violence, and recognize Israel's right to exist as preconditions for any meaningful peace negotiations. However, critics argued that the U.S.'s unwavering support for Israel emboldened its actions and hindered efforts to find a peaceful resolution. The U.S. government's position drew criticism from some quarters, both domestically and internationally. Critics argued that the U.S. should have used its influence to prevent the escalation of violence and push for a negotiated settlement. They also expressed concerns about the potential for civilian casualties and the worsening humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Despite the criticism, the U.S. remained steadfast in its support for Israel. They continued to provide military aid and diplomatic cover for Israel's actions, arguing that Israel had a right to defend itself against terrorist threats. The U.S.'s unwavering stance drew sharp condemnation from Hamas and its supporters, further deepening the divide in the region. Section 4. International Condemnation. A chorus of disapproval. The international community largely condemned Israel's strikes on Gaza. Numerous countries and organizations expressed grave concerns about the escalating violence and called for an immediate ceasefire. The strikes were widely viewed as a violation of international law and a disproportionate response to the hostage situation. Egypt, a key mediator in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, condemned the strikes as a flagrant violation of the ceasefire and called for an immediate cessation of hostilities. Qatar echoed these sentiments, warning that Israel's actions could ignite the entire region. China expressed high concern and urged all parties to exercise restraint and de-escalate the situation. Russia warned of a dangerous spiral of escalation and called for a return to the negotiating table. Saudi Arabia condemned the bombardment of civilian areas in Gaza and called on the international community to hold Israel accountable for its actions. Jordan condemned the aggressive and barbaric bombing of Gaza and urged Israel to cease its military operations immediately. Turkey, a vocal critic of Israel, accused Israel of pursuing a policy of genocide against the Palestinians. They called for international intervention to protect Palestinian civilians. France called for an immediate end to hostilities and urged both sides to return to the ceasefire agreement. The UK urged all parties to respect the ceasefire and return to dialogue. Ireland, Belgium, Italy, Spain, Germany, the Netherlands, Norway, Switzerland and Australia all issued statements condemning the strikes and calling for a de-escalation of the conflict. The widespread international condemnation highlighted the growing isolation of Israel on the world stage and the increasing unease over its actions in Gaza.